Good morning.
Good start.
I'm glad to see everybody here. This is quite much bigger deal than I expected, and I'm really thrilled to see everybody and everyone that's online. What we're going to talk about today is I will give a real brief history on Shelby American and how the club got started, which is what this is all about. Uh, After I'm done, I'm going to turn it over to Chuck Cantwell. He was employed by Carroll Shelby and Shelby American from 1965 through 67. He was the project engineer on the design and development of these cars. So he's going to fill you in on what made the GT350, what it was, and how they changed through the years. Uh, when we're done with that, we're going to turn it over to Larry Schaefer. He owns the 65 that's in the display downstairs. Uh, he's the original owner of the car, and he has quite a story of how the car was stolen and he got it back through help with the club. So he has quite a story. Chuck's gonna give his story on his car, and then I'm gonna finish up with the little story in the history of my car. And then after that, we're gonna open for question and answers. So let's go back to the beginning a little bit. 1962, Shelby took an American V8 engine, made it into a English chassis, and the Cobra was born. And as most people know, after a few trials and errors, the Cobra really became a huge success, both here in the United States with SCCA and USRRC Racing. Shelby then took it to Europe in 64, won Le Mans in the GT class, beat Ferrari, went back again in 65, beat Ferrari again, won the world championship. So when Ford wanted a performance image for the Mustang, they turned to Carroll Shelby and had him go to the SCCA to see what it would take to make the car legal. John Bishop told him, gave him the rules. Chuck and Shelby got together, they developed the car. It was a success right out of the box. It was national champion 3 years in a row. Cars evolved. It was 66 to the 67. Then Ford took over production. Shelby pretty much was kind of like name only. And then he ended in 69, went to Africa and ran safaris. Well, while he was in Africa, he didn't realize how the popularity of these cars and how these cars were still very popular. And that's how the club came about, because people started getting together. The club was founded in 1975. Enthusiasm is essential, not ownership, was the motto of the club. The last I'd seen, we had 4,000 members, 500 overseas. The club has stacks of memorabilia, but also information as far as VIN numbers, Ford VIN numbers, Shelby VIN numbers. Once you're a verified member or owner of the car, you have access to copies of the paperwork that pertain to your car. Play a big role in helping Larry with his car. And so that's where the club came from. The club this year, as a matter of fact, we are celebrating 50 years of being a club and stuff. So that's a quick brief history, just to give you an idea where we're coming from. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to let Chuck talk about what made the GT350 what it was and the differences and how it evolved over the years. Chuck?
Hey, thank you. Good to see everybody here. And we'll start a little bit talking about what went on, how the program developed. It started out with Lee Iacocca saying to his racing people, go take this little sedan that's coming up in a year. So this is probably 1963. Take this little sedan and go to SCCA and get it set up in Class B, get it approved. Well, he did that, and John Bishop, who was head of SCCA, said, no, we're not going to have a car like that in our sports car area. So he went back to Iacocca. Iacocca said, well, I'll talk to Shelby. He knows the SCCA guys. So Shelby got together with John Bishop and they sat down and went over what they could do to make the sedan an SCCA B production car. But what uh, they acknowledge that there's gonna be a coupe coming up at the end of the year in '64. And so that would be a better car to work on, and they wanted it to be a two passenger car, not a 4-passenger. And just a lot of things like that, and they talked about what we could do with brakes and transmissions and suspension and things like that. So they arrived at an agreeable situation, so they went back to Iacocca and said, okay, we can do something here and here's what we can do. And he thought everything was okay on that. And then in early '64, there was in the Shelby Ford Times, there was a little article in there that said Ford was going to have Shelby build some special Mustangs for racing. And this was completely ahead of anybody else's talk about this. So, but then they had 2 rally cars were built by the race people or suspension people and engine folks and sent to Europe, and they rallied for that winter and did real good over there. The cars came back. They sent them out to Shelby in California and Remington and 10 Miles played around with them for a while and got some lap times and stuff and decided that they were a good enough car with all those modifications that the car would be competitive in B production. And so in that summer, Sam Smith, who had been a Chevrolet engineer, a Corvette driver, had gone to work for Ray Geddes in Ford Special Vehicles, and he was liaison on the Shelby Mustang program, as it was sort of named at that time. And they were trying to plan on how to get together. They wouldn't have any cars. The fastbacks weren't coming out till September. So they had some time to get some people together. So they hired some folks, and I was fortunate enough to, I knew Sam from SCCA in Detroit, and so we talked and about the program, and he said, you want to interview with Shelby? So I said, yeah. So I interviewed and was hired, and I was racing MG at the time, and I wanted to finish the racing season, and so the schedule just worked out. That was good. We couldn't do anything because we wouldn't have any cars until October and November. So once we got the 3 main people, we had a production manager from a Chevrolet plant in California and a facilities guy from Ford Aerospace company out in LA. And that was the 3 new guys that sort of started getting this thing together. So so I was hired, and I started there in October, first of October, and we starting from scratch. I didn't know anything about the Ford cars or the way Ford did things, because I worked for GM at the time, and so I learned a lot. Sam Smith and I worked together for about 3 weeks. We had these big accounting spreadsheets about 2 foot wide and a 1.5 foot high, and we were going through every single part, everything we knew we wanted to have on the car, main components. And also, we spent 3 weeks going through every nut and bolt, everything we think of. Where identified where the parts would come from, whether they could be applied at the factory or whether we would have to install them at Shelby. And once we had that list, that was our starting point for the program. We got three cars finally were shipped to us in the first part of November. Two race cars and one street car. And the street car and the race cars had a different, that we ordered from the assembly plant, were a different modification. That's the way the race cars came to us. The top row is race cars, the bottom row was street cars. See, the race cars have no vent assembly in the quarter vent, that has no bumpers, has no glass in the doors or door winding mechanisms. It had no bumpers, no balance on the front or the bumper, and all the sound deadening and silencing putty and stuff like that they put in the cars was all left off the cars, and that took about 100 pounds off the cars. So that's how the race cars came to us. Now the street cars had a different configuration. They had no hoods, and they had that shows the basic parts that were added by the Shelby team in developing the GT350. And you can see there's headers on the car, and then the side exhaust system. In the middle, there's a big roll bar, competition brakes in the front, big brakes in the rear off a Fairlane or some kind of station wagon that we got those. And some of this we had to put on ourselves at the Shelby plant, and some we had to do at the assembly plant. So the 4-speed transmission and the rear ends could be assembled at the factory plant, and so that's what was done on that. But all these parts were scheduled to be put on. I visited the San Jose assembly plant when I first finally got out to California, and while walking around, I saw the export brace. We had the cars have what they call a Monte Carlo brace, which went crosswise between the two uprights on the suspension. And that was strengthened the front end, but I saw hanging on a wall assembly of parts that made a export brace for all the export cars they sent overseas. They put this heavier brace that ran from the center of the dash out to the two uprights, the spring towers, and between that and the Monte Carlo bars, that made it really, really strong. So we added that to the list of. After we had the first three cars, we started work immediately on a street car because we wanted a car that we could show around to the dealers and press and people like that. So that was started in the second building. Shelby had two buildings, the Princeton Street and Carter Street. And Carter Street building, they built the GT350 early ones. They weren't called 350 yet, but pretty soon after that, they arrived at a name for the car. And the race car, the first race car, was started in the hallway in the race shop, which was the main building, and it was built there to begin with. Well, once we had the three cars, then some cars started to flow in. We got a group of 10 cars, and that was half race and half street cars. And then we had 100 more cars were shipped out. So we had 100 and 110, I guess, starter cars from the factory on the property. So when one of the requirements SAC insisted on was that for a production race car, you had to have had to be a version of a car that had production of at least 100 cars. And so they came out, excuse me, in early January and checked the car lot, and we had 100 cars out there, all had hoods off and looked like we were working on them, even though we hadn't started working on most of them. And we had some finished, half a dozen or a dozen finished cars at that time and one race car that Bishop could look at and then approve. So he did that and then gave us his approval, and so we moved on from there. We built cars in the Carter Street building, and we built them on jack stands. The plan was to we had just gotten the hangars at the LAX, and one of those we were putting a pit in so we could do the underneath stuff on a sort of assembly line basis. And that was underway. It got hung up on the finishing up because it needed special lighting underneath there. And that took a while to get. But by the end of March, at the end of Sebring, when the race guys went to Sebring and came back, they came back to the factory at the airport. And so things started happening there. There were probably 50 cars or so built at the Carter Street on jack stands before we got the use of the pit over in at the airport. But by then we sort of moved everything over there, and we had one big, huge moving weekend where we set up the dyno and did all kinds of stuff and moved everything out of the Princeton Street location over to the airport. And that's how we started production. We built about 550 cars or something at altogether the first year. We built 36 race cars the first year, and they were they were the only GT350 race cars that were built that first year, 1965. And they, as someone mentioned, were good to win the national championship for 65, 6, and 7. But they were all 65 cars that did that. Let's see. The race cars, we're just starting here and go, okay, that's the first race car. Ken Miles drove that in Texas at a race track there, and they ran the race clockwise instead of counterclockwise. And this made a big bump in one part of the track, and Miles delighted with hitting that bump and getting all four wheels off the ground. So a lot of pictures were taken that first race, which was good for the publicity. And then he won 2 or 3 races that he ran in. Yeah, this good. That's the way the cars came, as I showed you before. Next one. That's interior door of a race car. It's all the soft materials removed and it's metal panels, it's fireproofing kind of thing. And the battery was used in the street cars and the race cars. It was put in the back for better weight distribution. Wasn't much weight on the back wheels of that car. But, and this is a race tank. This is two tanks, standard gas tanks that have been flipped bottoms on two bottoms on flipped together and welded together. And we ended up with a 32-gallon tank for longer races. And we had a Pete Brockett design the rear window. There you go. We okay? Yeah. Pete Brockett designed a rear window that had a gap in it. It was supposed to reduce the pressure on the inside of the car, but we weren't sure about how that worked. We never compared with anything. The beginning interior of the 65 GT350, it just had a dash with a speedometer and a couple of lights in it. So we wanted a little more information. So they designed a pod that fit on the dash panel and had a tachometer and an oil pressure gauge in it. And that was for the street cars and everything, but it's the heat sitting out in the sun. We started out with a plastic material, and sitting out in the sun it would warp the plastic, so we had to go to fiberglass for that. And the spare tire to make the car sports car for SCCA, we had to take out the back seat remove. We put a panel in there, and so we set the spare tire on that panel. That was part of the configuration of the 65 car. That shows the side. That's just the side exhaust and the rocker stripes that were Pete Brock designed to put on there. And he also designed overhead stripes that identified the car. But anyway, that was how you started in the 65 cars. Okay, the 66 cars had quite a lot of differences. One of them was the steering wheel that had a horn button. The 65s didn't have a horn button. They had a lever on the dash, and the 66s had a horn button. And it also had the rear seat in it. That was optional rear seat. And it had 14-inch wheels after. The 66 had 3 different variations. The first one was at the end of the 65 model year for the Shelby. Ford was still producing 65 cars, and we ordered 250 of those to be made in the 66 cars. And we put the 66 main features on those cars, including, but they had 15-inch wheels instead of 16. And we built those cars up to be as close as they could be with using the 66 base. So that was one version. The next version was a full 66 configuration that had all the 66 features on it, and that they were built for Hertz, 1,000 cars for Hertz. We built 2,300 cars altogether that year. At about February of 66, we deleted, went through an economy phase, I guess. We deleted a lot of different things, shock, so we deleted the Coney shocks and put in Ford shock, and we add 14. And all the 66s after the carryover cars used 14-inch wheels. So that was carried down. And the exhaust system was changed on the 66s. It had full exhaust to the back of the car. We had some different wheel options. We had the quarter windows in the 66 car and the tack location. We had Ford had come out with a new dash for 66, which was available in 65. So the 250 cars that we built had the new dash in the car, and the basic 67 had some ended up with motor wheels and some new cast aluminum 10-spoke wheels came out then. Quarter windows had the new dash instruments and the tachometer instance. The steering wheel and horn button were different. The traction bar locations were above the same, were the same as the 65s until January, and then they were put on. They were an underride traction bar. They had traction boots, hood assembly. We had 4 manufacturers making hoods for the 66 cars, which caused a lot of problems because some of them, when they were shipped from Detroit to California, were oiled so that they wouldn't rust. But when at the factory, when they painted them, they had to take the oil off, and they did a terrible job on a lot of cars. So we had cars that after a couple of years started doing the surface rust on the hoods. But we settled on the best of the hoods that got rid of that problem. There were some different emblems, optional carburetors for auto transmission. We had automatic transmissions available as an option. And most of the Hertz cars were automatic transmissions, but there's an awful lot of the street cars in 66 that were made for the 1300 that were made for private sale had automatic transmissions also. There was no locker rear end on the 66 cars. That was an option if you wanted it. The object of the 66 cars were to make it give it some design features and make it a little more sedate driving the car itself. It even had a radio option that could be used. And then in February of 66, deleted the Coney shocks from the order and put Ford shocks. We had underride traction bars, which meant we could take the rebound cables off the cars. The Coney shocks had no bumper rebound restraints within the shock, and the Ford. So we had to do external controls for that. And then the Ford shocks that we used had rebound and bump stop in the shock itself. So that meant we didn't have to put them on separately. We had in the 65s and the 66s through the first half of the year, we lowered the front A-arms to raise the roll center, and we took that process out, and on the Hertz cars we had a special master cylinder, so which was a Myco, and it was an odd feeling master cylinder. Eventually, we took that out because it was a lot of complaints about that. 66 race cars, there were no GT350 race cars in 66. And the factory, no factory team either that was racing the 66 cars. We went to Trans Am cars, which was no longer a GT350. It was a Ford Mustang. And we built about 20 some of those race cars for sale to people that wanted to race, and the new Trans Am series was new that year. At last race of the year at Riverside, we entered a car. Ford and Chrysler came into that race tied, and so we volunteered to prepare a car and take it to that last race. That whoever won that race would win the championship for the year. And the car won the tightest driving the car, and it won the race and won the championship for Ford, which sort of gave us an in to build Trans Am cars in 67. Okay, for 67, all of our staff meetings that were the design elements were talked about, and this decision was made that the 67 was going to be a pretty car and not a performance car necessarily, though we had good engines and stuff, and we were able in the 67s to put a big engine in and make a GT350, a GT500 out of that. So that was done with a lot of cars. 67 had a roll bar in the cars that went over the two seats, and on each roll bar there was a roller seatbelt harness set up, so that the person could get in the car and slip his hands underneath a Y-shaped belt, and then the tether to the belt would roll up on a winder, and then when you had to stop fast, the belt would lock, and that was an aircraft thing that we picked up. So that was done. What else for the body work? Of course, on the 67 was entirely different front end, different rear end. We had a Ford designer that worked with us for 3 or 4 months, and he worked about 24 hours a day trying to get that design and the clay modeling and everything that went into making a new body shape. But in the end, when they started producing them, we found out that the car we were using as a body book had been used for testing seat belts, and it twisted the body a little bit. So the fiberglass pieces in the front end didn't line up very well, and everyone had to adjust everything. And then we finally got a manufacturer to make the adjustments for us on the body pieces, and didn't have to do that any longer. So production was, I think we did about 3,367 cars, and in the end, the production was really rolling because we'd gotten rid of the problems, and it was a successful car. People liked the 500 power and like that, and the looks was more like a nice GT car and less like a performance car.
Larry Schaefer's gonna tell you about his car. the story behind his car.
I was at the Hershey Hill Climb in 1965. I raced a Bug Eye Sprite. And it was getting too modified. It wasn't a good street car anymore. So I was thinking about getting a street car. And Shelby was one of them. I also thought about the Sunbeam Tiger. That was a really a nice car too. And I was there, and a guy by the name of Charlie Beidler was racing a 1300cc Porsche. I happened to mention to him, I was looking for a car, and he says, I know where you can get one. He said, there's a 65 available in Cafferty Ford, Trenton, New Jersey, and gave me the name of the salesman to talk to. I went and talked to the guy. Well, should I say, talked to him on the phone. I'm 22 years old now. Okay, so I'm very naive at that point. And I said, all right, here, we negotiated the price, and I said, well, how about if I come down in about a month and we'll take care of it, because this was actually wintertime by now. And I went down with a friend of mine and saw the car, started doing paperwork. And my friend said, well, aren't you gonna test drive the car? Oh yeah, I guess I should, shouldn't I? You know, I didn't know any better. So I took it out for a test drive. My first turn went through sideways, my car. And turned out that I found out, oh my gosh, I guess it was 2005 or something like that. Charlie Beidler was the East Coast sales rep. That was his business car. So I bought his business car. It had 4,000 miles on it. I didn't know. I just thought it was just a trade-in. So I'm still the only original owner of it, because they didn't have him as owner of the business cars, and he was getting the 66. So he made that one available to me. So I take it home, and at a certain point, I started dating I lost my wife 2 years ago, but my wife, and she had a 63 Corvette convertible, and I had a 6 Shelby. So we spent a year dating in the Shelby. And after that, of course, we got married. And there's the picture. I went on my honeymoon to New Hampshire in the middle of winter. This is January. And if you look closely, you'll see something interesting there. Underneath the bumper is a tow hitch. I actually towed my race car for 4 years with that car. Who'd have believed? And back then, they weren't real good tow hitches. You know, it was a bumper and a bar going underneath the gas tank and attached to the chassis underneath there. I didn't think anything of it. Actually, I was going to a hill climb in Poconos called Blue Mountain Hill Climb. It's a new one, and I was lost. So I'm 180, and a friend of mine who was actually towing a Tiger, believe it or not, went by. I said, let me catch up to him, and I'll see what, see if he can show me how to get there. I'm towing my race car with that car at 105 miles an hour. Had no problem at all with it. Yeah. Actually, for you old guys around here, if you remember, 83 stopped at Colonial Park Road before it actually merged with 81. The road wasn't that busy, so I said, Nancy, let's see what the car will do. Well, they say 135. They're wrong. I slowed the valves at 7,200 RPM, 142. And it could have gone further. It really could have. It was that good. So get to the most interesting part of the whole thing is, let's see where we're going next here. There's a storyboard, by the way, downstairs, so it goes over the whole thing. But in September of '79, I walked out of into the parking lot at work, because I drove the car all the time. And it was lunchtime. I said, wait a minute, where did I park my car? I don't see it out here. Maybe I parked it somewhere else. Walked all around the parking lot. It was gone. So somebody had stolen the car from there. And I went home, I actually had a guy drive me home, and I walked in the front door, and she said, my wife said, where's the Shelby? I said, it was stolen. Since we dated and honeymooned that car, she cried. It was so important to us. And after that, believe it or not, I still remained a member of the Shelby Club. I liked the Shelby cars, so all that time I was a member of the Shelby Club. In 2005, I get a call from that guy sitting right over there, Howard Pardee. He's the director of the 65, 66 cars. He called me Sunday evening, if you remember, and said, what changes have you made to your car? I said, oh, why do you ask? He said, well, I think we found your car. You know, needless to say, at that point, I didn't remember anything. So he says, go on eBay. He said, all kinds of pictures on there. And I did make some changes, which I never remembered, in particular, the rear spring setup. And there was a picture. I said, yep, that's my car. So Howard knows all this, but I went to my insurance company because they paid me for the car. But the cool part about it was normally when an insurance company pays for your car, they take your title in their name. They never did that. So 5S416 is still, you know, I'm still really the only owner of the car, even though it went through the insurance company and then the guy that bought the car. And I called the state police, my insurance company, and that guy came out and he said to me, Mr. Schaefer, you're in trouble. What do you mean? He said, it's in New York. What does that mean? He says, in New York, the laws are different. And if the guy who has the car is an innocent party, he can keep it or sell it at will. Okay. So they impounded the car. That's what you normally expect, right? The local police impounded the car. And all of a sudden, we get told, hey, you're being sued. I'm being sued. Well, he said, they're suing you for taking the car illegally. So I spent 4.5 years in the court system as a defendant for getting my own car back. And the judge finally said, look, I've had enough of this stuff. Let's just, yeah, you guys need to work it out. We've had lawyers working for 4.5 years. Needless to say, the expenses were like that. And my insurance company, they came up with a price with their lawyers to the other guy's lawyers. And I said, I don't know if I really want to pay this price. And I had my ex-son-in-law, who's here, also helped me. So we're actually co-owners of the car now. Actually, I had to pay $90,000 to get it back. It's crazy to get my own car back, right? So there's the picture of it coming back. The fun part about this picture is that the guy who went and picked up the car, he knew what it was like up in Shelby County, New York. He was there at 6 o'clock in the morning to make sure that he could pick up the car and bring it back, because at noon, they shut it down. If you're in line, too bad. They shut it down. So he's bringing the car back, and needless to say, I'm sitting in the house with my wife and my sister-in-law and some other people, anxious to see what happens. I get a call from the guy. He said, hey, my dispatcher would like to see the car. Can I drop by the office? Oh, hey, it's been 30 years. Why not? Right? I'll do that. So I get it back and we take the car. It not working. I mean, well, Howard knows it was pretty ugly. It was sitting in the warehouse for like 20 years of that period. And you know what happens to a car when it sits around for 20 years? Paint's gone, there's cobwebs, it's musty. And I found out that the guy fired the car up after sitting that long without doing anything special, which is the worst thing you can do for a car. But anyway, the reason I got it back was not necessarily because I had a car for 13 years. I had a good time with it. Why do I want to pay all that to get it back? Well, Pete's son, my grandson, is named Shelby. And the reason he's named Shelby is because, my daughter thought that she loved my car, not Shelby car, and I said, my car so much, she named him Shelby. So I said, well, he's gotta have the car at some point. So I got it back and spent a year working on it. I don't have the pictures that, but I mean, stripped it down to bare metal. Get the engine and transmission and rear end rebuilt, and I did all the suspension work and the brakes and so forth. But it's gonna be a street car. Nowhere's gonna be a concourse car. Actually, I talked to, when I was up there, Kurt Vogt was there as an expert to go over the car in New York. And the one comment he made was, don't change what you've changed. That's part of the history of the car. And that's exactly what I'm doing. And there's some really, one thing I didn't think about. When they advertised the car on eBay, I had a friend of mine who, Joe Devine, which Charlie, you know Joe Devine, I'm pretty sure. He built, midget cars or worked in them. Anyway, he said, I said to him, I said, hey, the chassis in the back's rusted out where the rear perch for the spring is. And he said, okay, I'll fix it for you. I expect him to put a plate in and then reattach the rear spring at the back. No, he did the plate and he built a double U joint on both of them and put it through this, through the system. And they thought, oh, that's because it's to be adjusted for drag racing. There was nothing more to repair. That repair cost me $75, believe it or not. Can you imagine today what that would cost? So I'm going through all this and got the car running. And of course, the story has done a really good job of keeping interest in people. But I try to put 1,000 miles on it a year. Hopefully that'll, I want to street it. If I get a chip, I get a chip. I don't care as much as if I were building a concourse. But that's a quick version of the story. I could probably talk for about a half hour on the whole thing, but it's a 65 with a history probably no other car has. Howard would know that. That's probably about the only, it really is. And I'll tell you one more story, then we'll finish. I was down here to display and taking pictures with actually Pete's son-in-law. No, stepson, sorry. And taking a picture there, and some people were walking through. And the woman looked at me, she said, I bet that's your car, isn't it? And I said, yep, it is. Her jaw dropped out to the floor. So I spent another half hour talking to her about the history of the car. There you go. Good enough.
Yeah. Okay, my car is, was delivered to, New Hampshire in the spring of '66. It was built in, probably January or February, January, it was built. And it was sold by Grapponi Ford in 1966, and sold to a guy who apparently was in the Navy as a reservist or something. And he had it for a little while, and the next thing the dealer knew was that he'd parked it down in Baltimore at the docks and hopped on a Navy ship and was sailing off somewhere. And left the car. And the dealer picked it up and brought it up to act as to New Hampshire. And, Grapponi was the dealer up there. And, he sold it to another buyer. And the other buyer, drove the car for a while and then traded it in on a 67 Shelby. And he had that for a while. And he decided he liked the 66 better, so he went back to trade it back in and been sold to another person. And, so he didn't get to trade it. Then the buyer, last buyer sold it to a fellow named Stan Allenand, who had a collection of pretty rare cars, 3 or 4 anyway, that he kept stowed away on his farm. And so he bought the car and ran it in put a roll bar in it and ran it in some speed contest at New Hampshire Speedway. And for a while, and then he parked it in his garage and left it there in about 1970. And it stayed there until I'd become friends with Stan because when we had a Trans Am race in New Hampshire, we worked at the Grapponi dealership. Stan was there all that time, and so I got to see him, and he kept telling me, this was in, let's see, 2009, he kept telling me I should have that car, and he kept pushing and pushing, but he was a car salesman, so asked Stan, what do you want for the car? Well, what do you think it's worth? So I didn't know, and so we finally fussed around for a year and a half, back and forth like that, with nothing in everything tentatively talked about. So we finally got a deal together, and I bought the car in 2009 in the fall, and I arranged for Kurt Lowe to take it to his place and see what I was going to have to do to get it back on the road, because there was stuff and the brakes were stuck and several things like that. And the spark plugs had been out of it for several years, and the one cylinder had all rough walls and everything, but it turned out there was only 30 thousandths overboard, cleaned it up, so we bored the engine 30 thousandths and had Kurt's engine guy rebuild the engine. And then I went up starting January of 2010. For the next 6 months, I went up one week a month and worked on the car. And while they were working on the engine and other parts of it, and I was on sandblast and clean up and stuff like that. Unskilled labor, but I kept the project. By going up there once a month, I kept the project going, and by July, we had it all finished up, had new lines in it, and it took a couple of weeks to get the brake pistons unstuck, but once that was done, the car was ready to go, and we took it to Sears Point in California for Shelby meet. Kurt hauled it out there when he hauled his other cars and ran it on a little tour, and then brought it home, and it's run. I've run several tours. I've been to a lot of car shows with it. I've run several tours, GT350 tours, and other Shelby events that they have here. The group from the Lehigh Valley group has an annual show or tour, and I ran that for a number of years. But, so it's been a good car and I enjoyed it a lot. Um, it's run perfectly. It was, had to do very little maintenance on it, so keep it going. Good. And now it's in downstairs.
Yeah, that's downstairs.
I have the 67 downstairs in the display. I bought the car in 1984 after I sold a Boss 302. I had a chance to go on to Carlisle with some $7,500 that I could buy a Shelby. Well, I found a Shelby. I paid $7,500 for it, but let's just say the guy played some games with it. We drove it for about a year and a half, and we found rust in the torque box and the frame rail. And the car went into my garage for 19 years and just sat there. My kids loved the car, so whenever they had a school project involved the car, we'd inflate the tires, push it out, clean it, take pictures, push it back in. They'd do their project. In 2004, when CJ Pony Parts was still doing restoration stuff, they were the first ones to give me a call on restoring the car. We had no idea how bad the car was till we started digging. One of the things that the guy I bought it from, one of the things he did was the floor pan was starting to go. He put brand new floor pans on from the outside. So when we was up in the trailer, we were looking at, we thought we had a car with solid floor pans. No, and when this is what we found when we took the floor pans out, and as you can see, I mean, when you go back to this picture right here, some point in time before I had the car, it got hit in this area, and they did such a lousy job of repairing the car. That's where most of the water came in, most of the damage. And none of that's reproduced. It is being reproduced. We had to go to donor cars to get these pieces to rebuild the cowl and the A-pillar on the car there. So a lot of that part came out of donor cars. And then this picture here, next one. You can see then we had, because of that accident, the damage down the side, we had to reskin the side of it. But as you can see, I mean, this car literally had 1 foot in the grave. It was pretty bad shape. So we worked on that. It took 18 months to get the car done. I provided the information. CJ's did most of the work on it. One thing that was missing in the car when I got it was the original engine. So what we did was we put a Jasper's 302 in it and dressed it up, 350 horse to flywheel, and nobody knew. Until about 8 years ago, 10 years ago, I found a correct date-coded engine. And I have a correct date-coded engine back in it. The block was cast in December 1966. My car was built in early May 1967. The timeline's pretty close in there. I have the original, I have an original intake back on it, and I also have the 715. So it's as close as I'm going to get to without having my own engine. That was a big thing for us. Now, one of the advantages to the club is that once you're verified an owner and stuff, if there's paperwork available to your car, we can get copies. And that's a copy of the paperwork that went to the customer, sales invoice for my car. My car was sold to Universal Motors in Akron, Ohio. They bought it, and for the best we can tell, it was bought as a demo. Because there wasn't a whole lot of stuff added to the car. It was basically a plain Jane, as far as the Shelby goes, a plain Jane car. And so we think it was ordered as a demonstrator. I tried to track the history of the car, and I kept running into roadblocks. But I did eventually manage to get a hold of him at a Universal Motors in Akron, Ohio. And it turned out he's a Toyota dealership now. It's not the same one. It turned out that there was an employee at this Toyota dealer who used to work at the Universal Motors when they sold the Shelbys. So I got to talk to him. And one of the reasons we're having a hard time finding the paperwork is Universal Motors burned and all the records went with it. So we're still working to try to track more history on the car. But this was one I brought it back from, I like to say I brought it back from the grave because it was in pretty bad shape. I do drive the car like the rest. I've been on several tours with it. We've done some high-spirited pace laps on various racetracks around the country. And I'm also a member of MCA, and in their judge shows, I have a bronze, 2 silvers, and a gold in judge competition, along with driving the car and enjoying it. So it was a labor of love because when I was growing up, Chet Tobias, who was a well-known dirt track racer around here, had a speed shop, and his nephew lived just up the street from me, and he had an early 66 with this loud side exhaust and everything, and I'd hear that car leave every day, and I kept saying, that's the car I want, that's the car. It took me 20 years to get one, and then when I found out how bad it was, I was too damn stubborn to let it go. So 41 years later, I still own the car, and that's what it looks like now. Okay, so as you can tell, with the three of us, and we're not unusual because everybody out there, almost everybody out there that owns a Shelby has a story to go with it. And sometimes it's really interesting to hear those stories. So you heard our stories, you got a little bit of the history of the club and stuff. So now what we're going to do is open it to you. Any questions anybody has, we'll try to do our best to answer.
Do It House has a question for our guests. Go ahead.
Chuck, tell us what tracks you guys did the testing on and so forth with the 65s.
What was that?
For the
What tracks did you
engineering,
test the
side?
65s on?
Oh, okay, the 65s. Mainly, we tested at Willow Springs, but we did a couple tests at Riverside. We had the no spin locker was sort of a unique experience for everybody, but it was bulletproof and it worked. We never had a problem in the race or 24-hour or anything with that locker. But we went to Riverside and took 2 or 3 different models of limited slip differentials to put in there, and Jim Adams and I took a race car and a street car out there and ran them, and every one of those differentials self-destroyed when we ran sometimes only a few laps. That was we ran them as hard as they'd run, but they didn't last at all. So that was why we stayed with that unit. And then the next year, we just used the regular Ford differential at 66. We had the no spin as an option that year, but not as a standard. But we really wanted this, we needed the standard in 66. It was because of the locker, not a limited slip. We had to have it in all the 100 cars. So it was just made it a standard feature in the street car, and then put it in all the race cars too.
Go ahead, please.
You're talking about, excuse me a sec, you're talking about the reliability. Howard knows this because, and Pete, my ex-son-in-law there, we do hot laps with the car now. And hot laps when I have my grandson who's also drives at Shelby, and that one, we'll put 3 hours a day, in almost full race situations. The car comes back, but could care less. It's amazing how strong it is.
Sir, I was curious, since you're an engineer guy, in 65, a stock 289 Mustang, after you guys got done doing what you did to it, what were the lap time differences at, say, Riverside or up at Willow Springs?
In a Cobra and a Mustang?
Well, did you compare it against the stock Mustang?
excuse me, I think that what we did when we were playing around with the rear ends showed about an eight at Riverside, like an 8 second difference between the two, the race car and the street car. But at Willow Springs, we never really timed the streetcar. That I remember. And,
That's quite a difference. What did you attribute it to? Different geometry in the front end, or was it the extra
well,
25 horsepower or what?
I'm not sure that was even a good number, but that's what, so we ended up coming up with. It was, had more engine, of course. The race car would do, on a wide open track, would do 150 mile an hour. But that was all it would do. It would run at 150 and the needle was fixed. Or you'd run for 10 miles and you wouldn't go any faster. But you didn't run that fast. You ran that fast at Daytona you could get. I ran that our race car 002, the first one that ran that at 150.
So just, who was the fastest development driver? Was Ken Miles involved at that point?
Well, Ken and Bondurant tested the first car we built, first race car, 2 or 3 times once at Riverside. And I wasn't at that test, and then the rest of the tests were at Willow Springs, and then I drove at Summit Willow Springs and drove it a lot later. I pre-tested, pre-sale tested all the race cars except for about 6 at the beginning. And so I probably ran about 80 cars through the test day.
So who was the fastest driver of those?
Well, Miles had a 139.9 and I beat myself to death trying to get a 139.9. I get 140 flat. And it took me forever. One night when we were testing, it was it had cooled down out in the desert. We had some fresh tires on there. We were about out of gas. And I went around, I got a 139.9. But then Goodyear brought some new tires out a month or so later, and it took 2.5 seconds off of it right away. So I was like a 137.5. It was like the fastest we ran. But we couldn't get to use those tires for our racing. We used the stock car diamond thread race tire.
There another question?
I have a question for Larry on your car. I've had my Mustang for 26 years now. I know if I lost it, if I came out and found it missing, I would be devastated. It would be on my mind constantly and I'd be looking for it. So my 2-part question, did you spend any time looking for it during those years, if any interactions, and then did anyone ultimately end up facing any criminal charges as a result of this?
Good questions. And the answer is yes, to both. I ran out of time a little bit, but yeah, obviously, we let the Shelby Club know about it and tried to find something out and couldn't find anything. But 10 years after it was stolen, I get a phone call. And the guy says on the backside, he says, I know where your car is. For $11,000, I'll tell you where it is. And I wasn't interested, but I said, let me think about it. So I called my insurance company. The insurance company called the state police. And they came out and said, hey, would you go talk to the guy? He said, we're gonna put a wire on you. You go talk to the guy. I'm very shy most of the time. I said, oh, what the heck, why not? So I went over and talked to him and he had some cars there and I snuck in some serial numbers while I was doing it. Just to say, oh, this number is what does that mean? This serial number here, what does that mean? So I left and what the guy told me was, which was interesting, he said, some guys, he knew my car, because there's only one in Harrisburg area. He knew my car and he said, I got some kids stopped by. And they're the ones that stole your car. And they wanted me to buy the car, and he did. You know what I'm talking about, right, Howard? Yeah. Anyway, you know, I really kind of don't believe that. I think either he hadn't stolen or he stole it himself, but regardless of that. So I leave and the state police go over and arrest him. He's extorting money out of me. So the answer is, I didn't get anybody for stealing the car, but he went to jail for extortion.
Is he still there?
No,
Real quick, you were talking about floating your valves at 7,200 miles an hour or 7,200. What did that equate to in speed on the,
well, the speedometer only goes up to 120, so you gotta do all the calculations, right? Rear end ratio, engine speed, tire diameters, and like I said, I think it's before 142 is what it came out to. So it's almost as fast as the race car.
Yeah. Yeah, I've heard some high speeds sometimes from different cars. Different race cars.
Yeah, but one more comment for you. The cool thing about it was that car was so stable, I could have taken my hands off the steering wheel. What the things that Shelby did to that car were amazing. Those cars back then would start floating at 120. But this car was that stable. It could have cared less. Okay, so go ahead.
Me or Steve? Oh, the story that I had, learned about, the original prototypes for the GT350 were that Holman Moody built cars that won a Tour de France and they placed first, second, and third. And a prototype was sent out to Shelby and they modeled a lot of the things, the way they designed the GT350 after those cars. Is that, how did that story actually from your end?
I don't know. I don't think that's the truth.
Okay,
The race cars, Ford developed these rally cars, and they had a lot of the suspension stuff on that, and they sent them out for miles to run some, and he ran, and they said, they'll be fast enough we can make them fast enough to beat the Jaguars, which were the winners of that class the year before. And we had a build program that was based a lot on what they had in the rally cars. And I don't know if Holman Moody had anything to do with the rally cars or not.
were the rally cars the ones that were 64.5s that were modified? That were in the Tour de France? Was that the rally car?
They were running rallies before they were even released for sale. And there was two of them. And when they were at Shelby's in July or sometime like that, and I didn't go to work at Shelby until late October of '65, and they were there sitting in the corner, covered with dust, no engine, etc. And one of them, we eventually ended up selling them, but one of them, Ray Wolf, we gave one to Ray Wolf at who was Shelby's High Performance Motors dealerships manager, and he made a Trans Am car out of it. And he and I drove it in one Trans Am race at Riverside.
Thank you.
I'd just like to say thanks to the AACA Museum for this. It's great hearing stories like this and seeing these cars are what really makes it worth it. It's, it's amazing this much history at this table. You're able to share it with
And
us.
follow them down to the cars when you're done today, because it'll be even better. You can rattle their cages for even more information. I'm sure it'll flow out when they're next to their car.
I actually was on a tour with Chuck and his wife in Arkansas, and it was drizzly, rainy. He had fallen, he hurt his hip, he had a torn rotator cuff, he was driving a manual transmission, no power steering car. I figured, I'll follow Chuck, that'd be great. After 15 minutes, I told my wife, I'm going to die if I keep trying to follow Chuck. And everybody says, wow, Chuck is really slowed down. Fine, but he's got, like I say, I've blended a couple of Shelby meets, and it's really great to see these cars out driving around. It's all a lot of fun. Every time I take mine out, I feel 21 again.
Yeah,
2 hours.
it is amazing the response you get when you're out there. I was in Annville and just filled up at the gas station. I was gonna head out 934 across the highway. And there were 3 guys working on the roof at the college right there. And as I crossed the intersection, I saw them literally running across the roof to come over and watch me drive by.
Yeah, you got power steering though.
It's, you know, it's,
I'm 82 and I'll tell you, it's not as much fun as it was when I was 22.
but it is fun. It is amazing the response you get when you're out there with the cars. And that's, to me, that's the reason. I mean, I could, if I was just gonna put in a garage and look at it, I could put a cardboard cutout there and look at it, you know. I just would much rather go out and, I do get nervous, as, you know, you get nervous if somebody hits you or something.
Oh, come on.
You know, I'm fortunate on my car that I still have all the original hand laid fiberglass. You know, so if I lost that, I don't know how I would replace it. So I do get nervous, but I do enjoy driving a car. You know, that's half the fun.
Go ahead.
I have a comment, more or less. I assume that everybody in the room is fairly local and they're interested in cars and car collectors. Should I say gentleman that stole Larry's car was a professional car thief. He's still alive. I checked this week.
Oh.
He's still alive. And so
Why?
watch out if you're in Mechanicsburg.
Is that where he's at now?
Really?
We know who it is.
Seriously.
I'm just.
We all like to know who it is.
What's his?
Yes.
Question for Chuck. So, you see Carol Shelby, he's, bigger than my legend, see him on the movies and that kind of stuff. So, you worked for him. What was he like as a boss?
Well, with
Way
me,
back in the day when he wasn't like,
Yeah.
hero status.
well, he was pretty big when I met him. He was fine. He treated me right and, never had any problems, or we discussed things that we needed to, and, otherwise it was just to say hello every day and work. It was, I know some people had some problems, but
It's always that.
I never did.
That's an ordinary boss.
Yeah. It was, he always treated me very nicely.
How close was Ford versus Ferrari to the real thing?
Well, it's a movie.
I know. Did Ken really say that's a secretary's car?
Who, Shelby? Did
No,
say that?
Did Ken Miles say, he said to his son that said that Mustang's a secretary's car? Did he really
Well,
say that? I wonder.
that term was around, so he probably did sometime or another.
So then how does he handle the fact that he actually then started racing them successfully?
Well, he wasn't, I didn't know him when he would have said that, I don't think.
No, I was before you, I know.
Cause it was made as a secretary's car in a way, and found a lot of service in that role, but, they made the different versions of the car. So they had a hypo car. It was a pretty hot car. But the need was to have a street car you build 100 of at least. to qualify the car as a race car, so we could build however many, we built like 36 race cars, I think. And and they had the features they needed to have to be a good race car. The car handled very good. It was pretty fast and a lot of fun to drive and won a lot of races. So it was it did its job. But you had to build 100 streetcars, and we built 500 the first year. And, you know, and then it kept ramping up, 2,300 the second year, and then the second year, the GT350 wasn't a race car. We didn't have a race version of that car. Because that was the first year of the Trans Am, and we built sedan versions of that car and they were Ford Mustang cars with built according to the rules for the Trans Am races. They had different, you can strip the upholstery out of a 65 race car, when you get all the junk out of the way and cut the weight down, but the 66 cars that were Trans Am cars, you had to have a whole upholstery according to the rules, the FIA rules. You had to have upholstery in the car, full upholstery, which was it was different driving the two cars though. One car made a lot more noise than the Trans Am car with all the upholstery in it and everything and silencing. Yeah, man, it was a quiet. Be doing the same thing on the track, but it was quieter. So it was sort of an odd situation.
I have one other story. It's interesting about the Shelbys. I went down to Cumberland Raceway and watched the races down there. And I don't know if you know anything about the raceway. The finish line is only about say 100 feet before the turn.
For the turn of the cliff.
Right.
You go.
And I think it was Dick Thompson was in the Corvette. I don't know who was driving the Mustang, the Shelby, but at the finish line, the Corvette hit his brakes to be able to make the turn. The other guy didn't care. He went straight through into the runoff area, so he won the race.
Yeah, that was a conflicting situation where the start finish line was and where the turn was. But the turn, you went beyond the turn, you went down a pretty steep bank. It was fairly high.
Yeah.
So the temptation was there if you were winning the race.
I mean, I probably would have done the same thing, but
dared to do it.
whoever it was, I didn't care. And he was in second place at the time.
Yeah. Yeah, Dick was a good racer.
Right, we fielded a lot of questions in-house. There were none that came over the internet, so we're gonna wrap it up today. And thank everyone for coming to the museum where we've got great exhibits right now. We've got Forgotten Features, and it's gonna be followed up by our next most favorite vehicle, station wagons, this spring. So stop down and see our Shelby display. I'm learning. I'm sorry, I'm a Chevy guy. Stop down and see our exciting Shelby display downstairs while the owners of all three cars are here in the Williams Klein Gallery. And visit our website, donate, and thank you all for being here, Mr. Cantwell, Mr. Hill, Mr. Schaefer. So we'll see you on March 22nd for our next Museum Live event about the Great Race and the X Cup Youth Division. That'll be exciting as well. So if you like cars, automotive hobby, stories, and people driving, that's an excellent one to join. So everyone have a great weekend. We'll talk to you soon.